to record mode, and we are ready to go. Welcome to the 22nd Paparelli Zoom chat for entrepreneurs. Thank you all for coming. Last week we discussed what do you do when you outgrow your investors, and today we talk about perseverance, and I'm sure there's a connection between those two. So let's get started here. You know, there came a time in business when I was with Richard Brock way back when. He was my original business partner. He still were my best friend. And I had gotten to a point where in our business, enough was enough. You know, we're not making enough to live on. We were working ridiculous hours. The clients were all over us because of the bugs that were in the software that I wrote. Employees were quitting, and Richard, who was responsible for sales, could not for the life of him create a repeatable process. So I just got to a point one night, I just had it. You know, I was leaving the office at 7:30 at night, and Richard and I were there. There was probably a couple other people still around. And I just kind of unloaded on him. And he said to me, he said, look, think about it overnight. If you want out tomorrow morning, he says, you just tell me in the morning and I will buy your stock and it'll be over for you. And I want to thank God for Richard's perseverance. You know, I trusted him. That next day I did come in after I kind of cooled down for a while. And I learned from that test about perseverance in an entrepreneur. You know, we gutted it out. And just a couple of years later, we sold that business for $7 million. And that changed everything for me. And I know it changed everything for Richard too. You know, we always tell these happy ending type stories as entrepreneurs, but, you know, then there's the perseverance stories that result in what I'll call the living hell. You know, every day is the same as the day before. There's no breakthrough. There's no lucky bounce. There's no good breaks. What do we do then? And that brings us to our topic today, which is, can you really have too much perseverance? This is the Paparelli Zoom chat for entrepreneurs. We're all about entrepreneurs, helping entrepreneurs. Being an entrepreneur and leader is lonely, as we all know. And so I ask you to encourage you to use this forum to share your experience with your peers. We're really a community of entrepreneurs that we're building. And come early. We've had some great conversations catching up with each other. You know, but together we're stronger. So I ask you to put this Zoom chat on your calendar as a recurring event. The link is zoom.paparelli.com. If you just put that on your calendar, if you click it any time, you can see what's upcoming and past events. But at the same time, when the event starts, it'll automatically bring you into Zoom. There's a resource tab at paparelli.com. So anybody sends me anything that you think is helpful for the other CEOs, I'll add it there. Our house rules will be, if they're not already listed in the chat. Use the chat, by the way, to ask questions. John Marshall is monitoring the chat for us today, and he'll jump in from time to time with your questions if it's appropriate for the conversation I'm having at the time with our guest. If it's not, then he'll call on you after the event so that you can ask your question directly to our guest and after the Zoom chat does conclude. Our guest is going to stick around for an extra 15 minutes, which is from 9:45 to 10 a.m. So the first thing I do is I have the entrepreneur's thought of the day from the Bible on perseverance. And it's a definition of perseverance and where it comes from. And it's from Romans 5:3-5, which says, but we also glory in our sufferings, because we know that suffering produces perseverance. Perseverance, character, and character, hope. And the application here is if you're suffering, you have perseverance because you didn't run from it. And it's through this perseverance that we actually develop our character, the Bible tells us. And hope actually comes last, which kind of blew my mind because I always thought hope came first. By the way, I lead a Zoom Bible study on Thursdays. I've been meaning to tell you guys this, from 12 to 1. If any of you are interested in attending, uh, just send me an email and I'll include you in that invite list. But it's on 12 to 1 on Thursdays, and it goes on 3 times a month. My guest today is Rusty Gordon. You know, I met Rusty through the high-tech prayer breakfast community. And although we were in the technology community together, we really didn't know each other. But he, like me, was discovered by Bill Leonard back in the 1990s. There were only a few of us back then in the Atlanta technology, and there were even fewer events to attend as opposed to today where there's thousands. But Rusty was speaking on leadership, and in the Q&A, he was asked the question, what one book had the greatest impact on your life? And as he tells the story, he sheepishly answered the Bible, and he doesn't know why he brought it up, but he wanted to kind of take it back. But within minutes of finishing his talk, he's recruited as a leader for the high-tech prayer breakfast by Bill Leonard and Polly Harper, and they just rushed him. And Rusty and I grew up together in this high-tech prayer breakfast in the Atlanta tech community. We're the same age. We started at the same time. He was one of the early leaders in Peachtree Software and also in the first personal computer stores. That's how far back his career goes. And I've always admired Rusty. He has Oklahoma country values. He chooses hard things all the time and he sticks with them. You know, he is a follower of Jesus, as I said, but he's also a student and a teacher of leadership. I've learned a lot about servant leadership from my friend Rusty, and I learned it not by what he said, by who he is and what he does. I just watch him. He's been amazing over the 25 years we've known each other. He's a gifted athlete. He's trained as a professional manager. He loves entrepreneurs. He became one. And then he started doing the hardest of hard things, and he started doing turnarounds for early stage companies for venture capitalists a little bit further back. So, man, he picked some hard things to do. His latest company has been challenging. Its company name is Speedtacs, and that's what we'll be talking a little bit about today as we talk about perseverance. So, Rusty, thank you so much for joining me today in this conversation. You turn yourself on there. Unmute.
Thanks, Charlie. That's the nicest introduction that I think I've ever gotten. But you didn't say anything about being real bright.
Well, we're going to get to that. People are going to know that you're real bright. You know, when I was really looking forward to this our time together on this conversation of perseverance, you know, because you always tell great stories, and I know you're always learning from life and the people that you meet. You know, when we were talking just a couple of days ago, you told me that you told Ann, your wife, okay, you said, hey, I'm going to be talking to Charlie on this Zoom chat thing about perseverance. And why don't you tell that story, what happened?
She said, I heard you're going to be talking with Charlie. What's the subject? And what I actually said was, well, it's really about when to quit. And she said, well, what the hell is he having you on for? You've never quit anything in your whole life. I said, I think that's the point, that there probably is a time to quit. And we want to explore that. So it was hilarious. And you know, in fairness, Charlie, as you know, it's 44 years with Miss Ann. And so she didn't quit me and I didn't quit her. And that's been a nice ride.
Yeah, we always talk about perseverance being sort of, we're thinking about it in this context from the business standpoint, but there certainly is perseverance in our personal lives.
Amen.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And you started with that back in Oklahoma. Why don't you, I always tell the story of that you grew up down the road from the boondocks.
Yeah, that's what my dad used to say.
Because I think this is a little bit of a big piece of your foundation of perseverance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, my dad used to say, if you know where the boondocks are, we live right behind them. And where we were at the end of a dirt road. And if you're at the end of a dirt road in rural Oklahoma, there's a reason. And we were there, but perseverance kind of was something that wasn't talked about. It was just expected. You know, I thought oftentimes if one of us kids had been ADD, I don't know if they'd have buried us or what, because, you know, perseverance was just part of the game. And it came in fence building, it came in, you know, hauling hay, it came in all these things you do in the country. But as you know, I like to tell stories, and you like to hear the short versions of those.
Yeah.
Coming out of Oklahoma, the one experience I think that that really sums it all up is that we didn't, as you know, we didn't have power or water, and our well water wasn't drinkable. So we had to have to go to town about 6 miles away to haul water in 55-gallon drums to drink. Well, they eventually brought water out about 1.5 miles from our home, but we couldn't connect to it. So we had to bury pipe, and we couldn't afford to get that done. So we started a project with my brother and I of digging the ditch. We had to dig 3 feet a day using a pick and a mattock and a shovel, at least 3 feet. So it took us, it started when I was a freshman in high school. It took us 3 years to dig the line, to hook in the water. And, you know, that was kind of interesting. It wasn't optional in my case, but it certainly built perseverance into my brother and I.
How did you end up getting out of Oklahoma? How did you get off of the end of that dirt road?
That was really interesting. And that was something that concerned me from the time I was in the 8th or 9th grade. I knew that wasn't my place, but getting scholarships when you're in rural Oklahoma is hard. I had a pro baseball offer, but I didn't have a college scholarship offer. So it was a weird circumstance. But I ended up getting an appointment to the Naval Academy. Wow. And that is largely because I ran a campaign for the opponent of Senator Fred Harris, and we won the only county he lost. And so I got an appointment to the academy, and my parents were both Navy veterans, so it ended up being the place I went.
And then you didn't graduate from there.
No, that's kind of interesting. I had another perseverance story, I think, that really marked my life up there. And then a pivot. You know, I think we're talking about when to pivot as well. Yeah. And the perseverance story was with a buddy of mine on a dare, because we got dared by some upperclassmen. We ran a 50-mile race, and we didn't train for it. We just got up and went to it and ran it. And, you know, it took 11.5 hours. And I think that experience, it rained. That experience was an experience that I forever remember. He sent an article, and I remember just, it became one step at a time. He ended up with cramps at the 20-mile marker. And so we had to hold each other. So that was really interesting.
You didn't just hold each other. You carried him for how many miles?
About 30 miles, 28, 30 miles. He was around my shoulder. So it was a get after it moment. You know, it was kind of, are you going to do it or not? But I think I built on that Oklahoma experience with that. I think God was building these things in my life.
Yeah, but you put these, it seems to me that one of the things I've recognized in you is you choose to do really hard things. Like what idiot would choose to run 50 miles, right? I mean,
right.
So why did, I understand that your father said you and your brother needed to dig a trench for 1.5 miles. Okay. And he
right.
Unless you did it and finished it in 3 years. Okay. But, but why do is there a connection between let me just ask, why do you choose very hard things?
I think I told you when you talked about me in this subject, I told you my dad's quote, which others have heard, you can always be good for something. You can be a bad example.
Yeah.
I actually think that was a bit of a character flaw. I think that's been a flaw. I think that's certainly in terms of making money, that's been a mistake in my career. I think
Why is that a mistake?
well,
I think
because
perseverance is the one thing that, as investors, we're always looking for somebody who can prove perseverance. And you're
yeah,
saying it's a mistake. Why is it a mistake?
because I think there were other paths that I could have applied myself that would have been more productive. But to me, it was about winning the hard stuff. I think it was initially an
Tell
identity
me
issue.
something that you did, okay, that was a path that maybe you shouldn't have gone down and proved and suffered through and persevered through, that you
Yeah.
should have jumped
I
ship,
thought,
if you will.
I have a number of those. I think in there, I have started and pivoted business. The one I'm on now, I've pivoted 3 times. I would have been better off uh, checking it in early and going on to something else. Almost everything I think I've done. I was involved in a turnaround here in town called Knowledgeant that Matt
Yeah.
McConnell runs and does a great job of. That was an abusive 6 years, and it took 5.5 years before we turned it.
How did you get, you weren't one of the founders or on that team. How did you get involved with knowledge?
Yeah, I was introduced over there I had actually the business, my first significant failure was a business called iFleet, failure in terms of equity return to investors.
iFleet?
iFleet.
Okay.
And that was one, frankly, where,
Now you were were you a founder in that?
and we acquired some businesses and we did well. There was a turn in the market.
Why don't you talk a little bit about that? So go back to the idea and so that people understand what it was and why would you get attached to it? Why was it interesting to you?
I think the interesting thing is that I've been able to see where markets are going some, but I haven't gotten the timing right. And, as an entrepreneur, we got to get there early enough that we can make something happen without all the resources, but not so early we run out of, that the market doesn't come. And in iFleet, I'd met a guy named Sam Johnson, and we'd figured out how to combine GPS with cellular. So
Okay.
that we actually filed 2 patents, got the first 2 patents in that space. And we're using it, tracking vehicles and doing roadside service and doing all that, early consulting for OnStar with GM. And that market actually came much slower than we had anticipated. We got a big round of funding, but it was a tranche-based funding. And when it came time for the last tranche, the investors decided they had had enough.
How much did you raise up until that point?
It was about 18 million. It was a lot of money.
Okay.
We had done well with that money. We had a large roadside service. We were the largest roadside service company in the country outside of AAA. We were starting to integrate that, and the web had come, and some people didn't think the internet was ever going to be commercially viable. It would be brochures, and it was a real time of transition. But then the entire industry had a pullback, and I think that's one thing. Sometimes your perseverance cannot overcome the industry. We have a coronavirus right now. So the question is, do we persevere, or is it
What happened with that? So then you're at that next tranche ready to come in, and the investors go, we think that we're a long way from the right time, right?
Right.
For this
And
market.
what really happened was all of their businesses needed money. So they had to prioritize where they put their money. In our case, they were contractually bound, but there was nothing we could do about it. And so the decision was not to fund the business. And, I hadn't been a perfect CEO. We had made some mistakes along the way as well. And so they just had to make a priority decision. And in that priority,
like you took it all so gracefully.
well, I'll be honest with you, I didn't.
Yeah, be honest with me.
At that time, I thought I couldn't fail. I thought if I persevered hard enough, I would never fail. Okay. And when I failed, I had to make a decision on whether I owned that failure or I passed that failure off and justified it based on everything else. And I realized that if there's no failure, there's no winning. If you know, that's part of it. It's like athletics. If you don't lose, you don't value winning, and you don't understand how to win. And,
Okay.
and a single loss doesn't make you a loser, you know? And so I owned that loss. And interestingly enough, in many ways, it made me more valuable to everybody in our community. In other words, I started getting more requests, and I immediately got this other opportunity. And
That's
so,
interesting that you should bring that up, because a lot of times as entrepreneurs, we feel that, you know, I remember I had a conversation with a guy that was an entrepreneur in Silicon Valley and also an entrepreneur here. And he said Silicon Valley looks at entrepreneurs as their life is a movie. He
yeah,
says people here in Atlanta look at an entrepreneur's life as a snapshot. So if you have a
absolutely.
failure here, you're
Yeah,
done. Okay.
yeah,
But if you're in Silicon Valley, it's like, you're a really experienced guy. You know, you've tried and failed and tried and failed, and you keep going.
right,
So you
right.
go the other side of that here, though.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of merit to what you just said. Okay, and here there's a time frame too. When you take in money, there's an expectation with a time frame. I think you know, and so you can't just slow spend that money and wait for the market to come. You got to produce within a window, and that doesn't really favor guys like me. You know, guys like me are guys that just want to grab something and stay with it and see if the
Oh, I
market
see what you're saying.
comes to you.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
how did you persevere through this transition of, you know, but the failure is mine.
Yeah.
Just,
Yeah.
I mean, just that whole process that you went through, kind of bring us through that a little bit, because that's something I think we all go through because we don't want it to be ours.
Well, that was a faith moment for me too. And what was interesting about that is I had already, you know, I already had speaking engagements, the one you talk about. I'd already done some stuff. And I had already matured to a point where I was saying my identity is not in my business. I'm an entrepreneur, but my identity is not in my business. And that was a moment of truth where I had to look in the mirror and say, is that really true? And when I looked in that mirror,
How did you
I said,
even get
that's
to
not
that?
really true. Huh?
How did you even get to that? Because when I talk about entrepreneurs, you know, I say the business and the entrepreneur are one. You know,
Yeah.
there is no separating the two. And here you are saying, oh, yeah, I'm able to distance myself. That's not my identity. And I
I
mean,
think the
really?
I think the bigger mistakes I've made in my life is when I see the business and myself as one, because I'll make decisions that have to do with me in
Mm.
that process and decisions of what I see as success. So I think that was the moment where I saw I'm different, not because I distanced myself from the business, but I began to see it was kind of the same way with my marriage. When I saw my marriage as its own entity and I was contributing to it, and my wife, as opposed to it was about me, my
Yeah.
marriage was about me. Same thing on the business. When I see it as its own entity, I'm able to contribute, I think, at a much higher level. I'm also able to judge whether I'm right for the business at that moment, who else is needed, et cetera. So for me, it's a much healthier way at looking at what I do.
I guess I'm just a little confused as I don't understand how you even got to the question of identity.
Right. It was,
You know,
it,
because they're, you know, these VCs, they were investing in you that 18 million bucks, right?
right,
I mean, it was
right,
Rusty's out there giving speeches. Rusty's Mr. iFleet. Rusty's going to conferences. Rusty's on
right,
panels.
right.
Rusty, right? So how do you get to this and say, it's an identity issue? That doesn't even make sense to me. I don't understand how you got there.
Well, the first thing I think is the admission that you didn't make it. It wasn't just because of somebody else. You just didn't get the job done. I mean, there are variables you can't control, right? And you want to get beat by the things you can't control, not the ones you can. But in the game we play, you can lose. And I didn't think I could lose. So that was my identity. You know, if I only
So your
thought in that,
identity was as a winner.
that's right.
And now you had to accept, you had to check yourself in and say, is my identity now, because I got sidelined on this deal. No one's going to put any more money in. We're going to go out of business. Does that mean my identity now is I'm a loser?
That's right. That's right. And
How
I
did
had,
you deal with that's a really good. I get that. Okay. And
right,
you know, that's not in your background to say I lose.
right, right, right. Exactly correct. So I think part of that goes back to those roots. You know, it's like running that 50-mile race. I was willing to die on that course, but I also was aware I might die on that course. So
Okay.
I think once I realized that I gave the best I had, I did all I could, even though I made mistakes, you know, then I was able to give a little release from myself, right?
But you know, there's a difference though, in this that you're saying between running that race.
Yes,
Running that race really gets down to I'm going to finish this race. And if I don't finish this race, then I am a loser to myself, right?
right, right,
Now, the other thing is I'm getting these, I'm running a business. I have these tranches coming in this business.
right.
And then all of a sudden with the expectation of the tranche coming, I have my expenses at a certain level. We're doing this. We have a spend rate. And the guy goes, I ain't doing this anymore.
Right.
You know,
Right.
so so you can easily say, well, this thing all failed because of them. You,
Yeah.
but
Yeah,
really,
but you know, that's where I think athletics really, really played in on that too. I mean, you've seen games and been in games where time ran out, right? And they declared a winner or a loser. The game's over. I mean, if that thing had been 3 minutes longer, we'd have had it, right?
it happened to Alabama once against Auburn.
1 second. We have 1 second labels all over the house. Give me a second, Nick. But you know, I think that's coming to that. That background helped in that, Charlie. And then what are you going to do? I mean, I wasn't over. So I'm going to tuck my tail and run, or I'm going to blame this on others when I know, you know, that I was the leader. It was my watch.
Yeah, back then, I felt like when you would tell me those things about what happened, that you were being the big guy and the leader and taking it on yourself. But in the early stages of all that's coming, you going through this analysis, I felt like you were being disingenuous, to tell you the truth,
Right.
that you were really blaming them.
Yeah.
Okay. That,
Yeah.
you know, it's sort of like I was running this race and then they built this wall that I couldn't get around. They put me in a box and I couldn't get out. Right. But eventually you came around to it was you.
I might have been doing that. I wouldn't be surprised I was doing that. I
Yeah.
think with me, I'm a hard-headed guy. That's perseverance comes from hard-headedness, and I have to teach myself. I mean, I have these issues that I have to watch for in me, and that was one. I had to say, "Hey, look, are you going to own something?" So it took me a while to teach myself that, you know, you need to own wins and losses if you're going to be valuable yourself and if you're going to be valuable to others. And I see that as a challenge.
How did you come out on the other side of that then? You said all of a sudden you said it surprised you that people were, that even though you felt you were down and that this thing failed, okay?
Right.
And you're saying, I'm going to own this, all right? So then I carry that forward and that could put you in a pretty low state of emotional state. What
Yeah.
happened after that?
Well, what's interesting is I fancy myself as a coach.
I'm going to just say, you weren't allowed to persevere.
Right.
That's what happened. Somebody called it on you.
That's right. Time got called timeout.
Oh, okay, good. So what do you do now?
Well, that's what happened was really interesting because I've always seen myself as a coach and a guy to be coached. And what happened were people were more interested than they were before. And I learned something that probably everybody on this call already knows, but I really didn't know inside me, which is people learn more from your failures than they do your successes.
Yeah, that's what everybody says.
Yeah, but it's hard. It
Yeah.
happens to be true.
I'm saying that's what everybody says. I don't know that I'm saying that tongue in cheek because that's what I don't know that anybody wants to believe it. Okay.
Well, I think when you look at entrepreneurs, they're very confident in themselves,
Mhm.
and the smart ones are concerned about their blind spots. So when they see somebody that maybe is a peer or is in their community, and they hit a challenge, they want to really see that challenge to make sure that they're not falling in that same trap, right? I don't think entrepreneurs worry as much about how they win as they worry about the traps along the way that they could step in. So I think when you have a mistake or a failure, you know, your willingness to talk about that, I think is really important to the community. And, you know, I was willing to do that.
So how did the community react?
Well, it's interesting. There was more and more interest, kind of like you digging down into it right now. You know, there's more and more interest around that experience and what you went through and how long it took you to get up off the mat. And, you know, did you reevaluate how you make decisions and those kind of things? And so there was a lot of interest.
So the real learning that you got is that having tried and failed, you know, made you more valuable in the community, or at least more interesting in the community.
Right.
You know,
and we associate things like leaders with winners. That's not always the case. A leader is to lead, right? I mean, there are setbacks along the way, especially in a career. But I was subject to what you said, Charlie, which is I felt like you were absolutely defined by your last transaction.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't matter what happened. And so that was the pleasant surprise, was I wasn't. Some of the other people in the community, investors, people like yourself, et cetera, all of a sudden I'm not ostracized to the losers bracket. You know, I was still in the community. And I think a little bit more transparency.
What did the community see in you?
Huh?
Okay. What did the community see in you if they didn't see you as a loser?
I don't know. I think it had to do.
It's not true of everybody. Sometimes a fella comes out or a fellow gal comes out of a deal like this, and it's like, ooh, stay away from them.
Right. Why
not stay away from Rusty?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a great question. I should be asking you that. I don't have to know that answer, you know. I just know it didn't happen. I think maybe.
Yeah, but you've made some choices too around people. So you do have an answer to that. It might not be a personal answer, but there's some answers on why you've sort of categorized somebody as, you know, stay away from them, and others that you say, I need to re-engage and get actually closer to them after a loss like that.
Yeah, I really think people saw me as potentially better than I was before. Maybe I was full of myself before and didn't really realize it. You know, most people that are full of themselves think they're humble, and they're not. And I think maybe I became more genuine in that experience, you know.
That's funny. I got a friend of mine that always talks about him. He always talks humbly.
Yeah.
Not a friend of mine, just a guy that I know. And I said to him, I said, you know, I don't believe your humility all the time. You know, he goes, oh, but I'm proud of my humility.
You know, humble doesn't mean you're not exceptional. It just means you know what you can do, and you know what you can't do, and you know what God does, right? That's all. It's just being, you know, just being clear on where you are.
You brought God up a couple of times in here. How does God play in perseverance? How does that all work for you?
Well, I think, you know, it's the Bible's really interesting about that. The verse you used, one of my favorite verses, and I almost read that verse. If you remember, it says suffering leads to perseverance, character. That verse says to me, you cannot develop your character without perseverance. You have a character, but if you're going to develop it, it requires perseverance. It requires grinding, right? And so, you know, so that to me is one of the things, you know, to be at least partially a grinder, especially in a culture right now that doesn't appreciate that very much. Okay. That's character development. So if I want to be a better person, if that's important to me as much as it is to make more money, you know, then this is my lot in life. This was assigned to me, you know.
How come perseverance didn't just, you know, like you said, there's perseverance and there's what I call the happy stories, right?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and then we built. Then 2 years later, the company sold, and happily ever after stuff. Okay, but a lot of your perseverance has ended in not great results. Okay, So how come you don't talk, you don't walk away as just a nasty SOB, you know, that sort of sees the world all black? I mean, why isn't that your character?
Well, because even in the things that haven't worked, some have worked. I've got the same couple of stories where the last moment it all worked out, etc. Some hasn't, but in all of those, I have actually ended up with incredibly rich relationships. The things that don't work, people have grown on my watch along with me growing. And so I learned to start shifting what I wanted out of life. And this is where I was very fortunate, because I began life without a whole lot. I've never really valued having a whole lot of money. It was more of a measurement, but that's just because I was gifted with the beginnings I have. But those relationships, when you're out there at the end of the dirt road, you don't have many neighbors. They're a couple of miles away, but when you need them, you need them.
Yeah.
And so I think doing this, you know, I'm a coach, and I watch people develop, and I watch myself develop. So I don't see those as circumstances. And I've created good returns for investors over my career. You know, I mean, it's not like it's not like I don't want anybody to think no investors ever made money with me. That's not the case at all. Okay?
Yeah, but now you come into is, and you know, we're about the same age, right? So we get involved with these businesses at the end. Sometimes the things that I feel is that my prime time was back in my sort of mid 40s to mid 50s.
Right.
And now that as I started getting into my early 60s, I'm feeling like I'm not seeing the wins that I used to have. Okay. So I'm like, am I crawling out the
Right.
back door, you know,
Right.
and, you know, as opposed to having this brilliant sort of Lee Iacocca career, you know, handling, you know, the 4th of July celebration in New York, right? You know, I mean, like top of the game. But instead, it's, you know, so here you are. Tell us about Speedtacs and how that all sort of started, and how you and the pivots you kind of went through a little bit.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because we've been through a number.
You've been in that thing up to here. All right.
Right, absolutely. Invested everything, money, time, everything. And that's been a series of pivots, you know, as we've looked out there and the market didn't come to us quick enough. I got involved because my passions crossed. It was a system that developed athletes for speed where nobody was doing it. That didn't work. It cost us more to sell them than we made on them, and we could never figure that out. And so we pivoted that with another business that we combined to do recruiting. And it was collegiate athletics recruiting, primary football, where we recruit, I think, you know, for 10 of the last 11 national champions use our system. And then we use Speedtacs to go out and evaluate athletes. And then I realized that market was too small, but we could start treating high schoolers as blue chip. And so we pivoted to using that same system to go onto high school campuses and help people like the National Guard or the Army to recruit, okay? And that was taking off. We were at the edge of we've had 3 or 4 years where we've had modest contracts, and that was taking off, and the coronavirus hit it the first of this year. So this is our third pivot, and you can't.
How many years has this been going on now?
9.
9 years.
9 years.
Okay, so we went
Should
from
I have exited
faster to now we're going to do recruiting for
right.
other people. So it's more of a sell-through type device. It's a way to get people on top of the funnel for somebody. And now it's the Army, National Guard, all that, right?
Right.
Okay.
But it's others as well. And what's interesting, what we learned, we have deep knowledge in this space, and what we learn and what we believe is that that high school kids are highly confused graduating on what they should do, and their tact for their life is poor. And every young man and woman should be recruited like a 5-star athlete. And so that's what drives our business. But the problem was we can no longer go on high school campuses. We had refined this operation. It was doing really well.
Yeah,
and
but
so,
there wasn't a lot of revenue coming out of this thing.
No, we were starting to build revenue.
When you went home, you know, sometimes you got to be driving home in your truck going, what the hell am I doing? I mean, come on. I mean, tell me what some of the sort of inside baseball thinking was there.
Yeah. Well, I think the mission, well, number one, exactly that. Are we ever going to be able to scale this thing? And I have a lot of my personal money in this, not only that, but my time. Are we ever going to
Plus,
be
you
able
brought a lot of your friends' money in it. You got a lot behind
friends'
it.
money in it, and I wasn't going to quit on them. I'm really fortunate to have great friends. I think every one of my friends has come to me and said, Rusty, let it go. Let it go.
Really?
I'm not worried about it. Yeah.
So they love you so much, they've seen enough suffering.
Yeah. That's
Okay.
exactly right.
So when they tell you, come on, Rusty, just let it go.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're at mile 37.
Right. We're in mile 37. That's exactly
what we
right.
do.
Yeah.
So what do you do when you hear that?
Well, you have to, I think for me, I have to evaluate, am I hanging on just to hang on? Or is there really something here? And is it really coming our direction? You know, is it worth that last 5%? Everything gets defined by the last 5%, right?
I don't know.
So,
is that true?
to me, it is.
Okay.
Most money's made in the last 5%. Most costs are given into the last 5%. Can you get this to where it will scale? And so we thought we were out of business when we couldn't go on high school campuses, because we had a contract at that point from the National Guard that was a decent contract. And we've made one last pivot to do that virtually. So we have a virtual, because we've already done what we've done and we have a reputation, we're doing this virtually. And we have proposals out to the Army and to Space Force. You talk about persevering.
But you told me at one point, you said, I'll tell you, man, if this last one doesn't work, what'd you tell me?
This proposal, if we do not get a contract from Space Force or Army is the contract. If we don't get it within the next very short period of time, we're done.
Why? Why then? You had that moment over 9 years, 9 times. Okay.
Right.
Why this time are you now downward voice inflection? No kidding, man. And it's over. Okay.
Yeah.
Why?
This is scalable. This answers all the questions. If the market won't adopt it, if the market doesn't move to it, then it's time. It's got to go. Not the least of which, Charlie, is nobody's getting paid in this business, right? I've got people I can't fire. They're working.
What happens to you? You've thought about the other side of this. Mm-hmm. So what if you do say it's over, it's done, 9 years? What happens to Rusty? How does Rusty feel about that?
That's really interesting, because then you have to ask yourself, or do you really have to have the money? Are you really playing for the money? I've got the good fortune. As you know, I've got a farm with some horses in Alabama.
It ain't about the money.
Right.
This is about identity again.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
How do you deal with that? Because it's not like, this is, again, you're my age, man. This isn't like, oh, well, it doesn't matter. I'm 34 years old. No. It's going to come along, right?
Yeah. Well, the irony on this thing, Charlie, is that I've got other businesses that are positioned for pivots or going through pivots that have asked me for help. And so I'm helping others who, by the way, are doing better than me. And so I don't know how to chalk that up. Maybe I shouldn't let these stories that you and I are talking about out so clear. It's going to affect my future. But where I'm able to help people and give advice and explain where the rough parts are and the speed of pivoting and those things, it's working very well. So I think on the other side, as long as people call me and ask me for some help, I'll be doing that.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've learned from this, and this is for me, because like I said, I feel like sometimes I'm crawling out the back door so that no one will see me. That's how I'm going to end my career. Yeah. But I think the fact of the matter is that we've had an entire career of perseverance.
Yeah.
We've always worked on the hard things. I mean, we've worked in startups now. Literally, I've been in startups for over 40 years. Okay. So here it is crazy. I mean, and I remember a few times when I had this vision. I said, this was back in the mid-90s. I said, why don't you move to private equity? You could actually have like a salary and a fund and travel first class and, deal with like real managers, you know, and have
Yeah.
recruiters, and you know, it's
Right.
like a nice life, right? You can eat
Right.
dinners at nice places instead of meeting people at Arby's, you know, to kind of talk about what their careers are doing. And so, but you know, I think we've been chosen to be in this hard space. We've been chosen to. I think that together we've we've suffered, but it's suffering that gave us perseverance, and the character piece that came out of this that's been so wonderful is the relationships that we now share.
Right.
And so if that's the measurement at the end of all this is the
Yeah.
depth and strength of those relationships, then
Yeah.
whether we had the cash out or whether we had the article that we're a great success, I don't know that it matters that much.
No, and you know, Charlie, we lose back to we lose sight of the fact that we're the privileged. You
Yeah.
know, that was the whole thing coming up from Oklahoma. I mean, I know what low is. None of us on this call or anywhere
You
near low,
you didn't
man,
have an inside toilet until when?
until I was in the senior in high school.
Yeah, there you go. Okay.
So
That's
we're the privileged, you know, and I think we lose sight of that because we get our identity so tied. We lose sight of the fact that no matter what happens,
yeah.
we've been privileged, and so live it with that robustness, you know, that's there. Be very careful. You know, pivoting is quitting on a business, but you know, to me, what I will never do is quit on people. You know, I'm just not going to quit on people. You know, there's a whole difference between
Let me
those.
do this. We have to end this call, and let's end this call on we don't quit on people. And I think that's if we can say anything about what is perseverance, perseverance is continuing to go on and never, ever, ever quit on people. I mean, that's pretty powerful. Rusty, thank you so much. This has been brilliant. You know, I knew it was going to be a fun conversation. I thank you so much for joining me here. So, you know, I know that you guys have a lot of insights from this conversation, you know, having heard us have this conversation. If you would send those insights to me when I publish this summary from this talk, this Zoom chat, you know, I'll include yours and I'll give you credit for it. So a reminder to all us entrepreneurs that are out there, you know, watch your cash, comes in slow, goes out fast. I want you to learn fast, decide fast, and go fast. That's what we're about. The next Zoom chat for entrepreneurs is going to be on September 30th, so a week from today. And my guest is going to be Patrick Taylor, who's the founder and former CEO of Oversight Systems. You know, he is currently the VP now of Tech Operators Venture Capital. So he has jumped the fence, this man, all right, in the latter part of his career. But his topic is going to be interesting. It's going to be sales secret of an early stage experienced entrepreneur. And he shared some of that at one of our Angel Lounge events that we've had. And I thought he'd be great for helping entrepreneurs as they get into sort of selling as non-sales professionals. So sign in early, catch up with a lot of friends like we did today, which has been brilliant. And remember, I am praying for you. Thanks for attending. This is the end of this call. And I'm going to stop this recording, and then I'm going to open it back up again and Rusty's going to stick around until 10 o'clock. So I'm going to have John kind of take over, and he's going to call on you to ask your questions that you have for Rusty. Thank you so much for attending.
All right. Thank you very much.